What do you say if a cop keeps you talking after your traffic stop should already be over? If you ask, am I under arrest? Too soon, you can sound scared, confused, and easy to pressure. The smarter question tells you whether the stop is still legal or whether you can leave right now. Before I reveal the exact words, hit subscribe and like this video so you can find it fast when your heart is pounding on a real roadside stop. Do that now, because what you learn here could stop you from talking your way into handcuffs. Most people have no idea how fast a normal stop can turn into a fishing trip. You think you're just getting a warning. Then the officer starts asking where you're coming from, where you're going, whether you have anything illegal, and whether you mind if they take a quick look. That is the danger zone for you. In this video, you're going to learn the one question that forces clarity, the exact sentence that blocks fake consent, the calm move that keeps you from making things worse, and the court cases that back all of it up. Let me show you exactly how smart drivers keep control without acting rude, loud, or reckless. Here's why this matters to you so much. A traffic stop has a job. The officer handles the traffic issue. That means your license, registration, insurance, maybe a warning, maybe a ticket, and then you should be done. But a lot of drivers keep talking after that point. They answer extra questions. They agree to searches. They think being super friendly will save them. Here's the reality. Once you start guessing, explaining, or trying to talk your way out of it, you can give the officer more reasons to keep you there. And once you say yes to one bad request, the whole stop can open up in a way you never expected. The first move is not asking, am I under arrest? That question is weak because it sounds like you only know two settings, free or arrested. There is a giant middle space called detention. That's when the officer is holding you, but has not arrested you. If you don't know that, you can miss the moment when the stop becomes extra questioning with no clear reason. Here's exactly what you say. Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Word for word, memorize that line. You ask it when the traffic part seems done and the officer keeps fishing. Maybe your documents are back in your hand. Maybe the warning is already explained. Maybe the officer suddenly switches to, hey, can I ask you something real quick? That is your cue. Why does that question work for you? Because it forces the officer to choose. If you are free to leave, the conversation should end. If you are being detained, the officer is putting that on the record. That matters for you later. This comes straight from Supreme Court rulings. In United States v. Mendenhall, the court said a person is seized when a reasonable person would not feel free to leave. In plain English, if a normal person in your spot would think, I can't just drive away, then the law treats that like a real police detention. And in Rodriguez v. United States, the court said a traffic stop has to end when the traffic job is done, unless the officer has separate reasonable suspicion. That means a stop cannot be stretched just to go hunting for something else. Bad way, most drivers say, am I under arrest? Then the officer says no, keeps the pressure on, and the driver keeps talking. Good way, smart drivers say, officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Then the officer has to give a clear answer or end the encounter. Watch what happens when you use that line the right way. The whole mood changes. You stop sounding emotional, you stop sounding defensive, you sound clear, you sound calm. You sound like someone who understands the rules. Defense attorneys use this exact line in court because it creates a clean record. If the officer says you are free to leave, you leave. If the officer says you are detained, then everyone knows the stop is still being held open. That one question does not magically make you win, but it stops you from wandering into trouble with your mouth open and your rights closed. Think you could stay this calm during a real stop? Let me know in the comments. The second move is what you say the second a search comes up. If the officer says, you don't mind if I take a quick look, right? Or if you've got nothing to hide, let me check. You need a clean answer. No speeches, no attitude, no fake law school lecture. Here's exactly what you say. Officer, I do not consent to any searches. Those exact words. Say them once. Say them clearly. If they ask again, repeat the same sentence. Nothing more. This is 100% legal. You are not required to make their job easier by volunteering your car, your bags, or your trunk. Here's the trick they don't want you knowing. A lot of searches happen because drivers say yes without even realizing it. They think the officer already has the power, so they go along. But once you consent, you hand over a giant piece of your protection. In Schneckloth v. Bustamonte, the Supreme Court said consent searches can be valid if your consent is voluntary. In plain English, if you say yes on your own, that yes can count even if you did not know you could refuse. That is exactly why your no matters so much. And in Florida v. Jimeno, the court said a general yes to search a car can also let officers open containers inside that car if it makes sense for the object they're looking for. So when you say yes to a quick look, you may be saying yes to a lot more than you think. Bad way, most drivers say, sure, go ahead, I've got nothing to hide. Then the officer searches everywhere your consent seems to cover. Good way, smart drivers say, officer, I do not consent to any searches. Then you keep your rights in place, even if the officer searches anyway. Here's the reality. Your refusal does not mean the officer will always stop. If they claim probable cause or another legal reason, they may still search, but your refusal still protects you. It shows you did not volunteer. It gives your lawyer something real to work with later. Former police officers have confirmed this works because it changes the paper trail and the body cam story. Your goal is not to win a roadside debate. Your goal is to avoid helping build the case against yourself, so do not explain, do not joke, do not say, why, what are you looking for? Just give the line and stop talking. The third move matters when the officer tells you to get out of the car. A lot of drivers think that order means the officer now gets everything else too. That is false. You can obey the exit order and still protect your rights. Here's exactly what you say. I will step out, but I do not consent to any searches. Word for word. That sentence does two jobs for you. First, it shows compliance with the lawful order. Second, it makes your position clear before the officer tries to turn movement into permission. Listen closely because this is critical. In Pennsylvania v. Mimms, the Supreme Court said an officer can order a driver out of a car during a lawful traffic stop. In plain English, if you are lawfully pulled over, you usually cannot win by arguing about stepping out right there on the roadside. Just step out. But that does not mean they get to search everything, because you moved. And Terry v. Ohio says an officer needs reasonable suspicion to do a limited frisk for weapons. In plain English, they need specific facts that make them think you may be armed and dangerous. Not just a vibe, not just because I said so your job is simple. Obey the lawful step-out order. Do not resist, but do not donate your rights with your words. Bad way. Most drivers say, why do I have to get out? I didn't do anything. Then the stop gets tense, the officer gets louder, and you look harder to control. Good way. Smart drivers say, I will step out, but I do not consent to any searches. Then you comply without giving away anything extra. Watch what happens when you use that line. You take away the officer's favorite shortcut. They want you emotional. They want you arguing. They want you blurting out little things they can use later. Your calm response blocks all of that. Legal experts agree this is your strongest protection when the stop starts shifting from traffic business to criminal investigation. You are not refusing a lawful order. You are refusing to make that order bigger than it is, and that difference can save you. 90% of drivers don't know what's coming next. Stay with me because this next part is where people accidentally trap themselves even after they use the first three lines correctly. The fourth move is what you do with silence. After you ask whether you are being detained or free to leave, after you refuse consent, and after you step out if ordered, the officer may keep chatting. Where were you earlier? Why are you nervous? Whose bag is that? Mind explaining this smell? That is when your mouth can wreck everything you just did right. Here's exactly what you say. I choose to remain silent. If the questions turn serious, add this. I want a lawyer. Short, calm, done. Let me show you exactly why this matters so much for you. People think silence makes them look guilty. In real life, talking usually makes them look inconsistent. You do not have to fill every quiet second with words. You do not have to explain why you are nervous. Most innocent people are nervous around police. You do not have to guess what they know. You do not have to fix their suspicions with extra stories. This is 100% legal. Your silence is not disrespect. Your silence is protection. And if you already asked the smart question and the officer still keeps you there, your silence keeps the stop from growing through your own mouth. If you are free to leave, if you are detained, stop helping. That is how smart people avoid walking into contradictions, admissions, and consent. They never meant to give. Now tie all of this together in your head. Mendenhall gives you the basic idea of free to leave. Rodriguez says the stop cannot be stretched past the traffic mission without separate reasonable suspicion. Schneckloth warns you that voluntary consent can count even when you did not know you could say no. Jimeno warns you that a broad yes can open containers too. Mimms says you can be ordered out of the car during a lawful stop. Terry says a frisk needs reasonable suspicion that you may be armed and dangerous. In 7th grade English, here is the full message for you. Police have real powers during a real stop. But those powers are not unlimited, and your words decide whether you protect yourself or make their job easier. So what does this look like in a real stop for you? Picture this. You get pulled over for a broken taillight. You hand over your documents. The officer goes back, checks things, then comes back and gives you a warning. At that point, the traffic job looks done. Then the officer smiles and says, hey, before you go, you don't have any drugs or weapons in the car, do you? Most drivers fall apart right there. They laugh too hard. They start over-explaining. They say, no, of course not, you can check. That is how a warning stop turns into a search stop. Bad way. Most drivers say, no, I'm not under arrest, right? So what's the big deal? Go ahead and look. Then the officer gets more time, more access, and more statements to use. Good way. Smart drivers say, officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave? Then they listen for the answer, refuse consent if asked, and stay quiet. Now watch the smart version. The officer asks the extra question. You stay calm. You say, "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave?" If the officer says, "You're free to go," you leave. No extra chat, no victory speech, no sarcastic smile. You just go. If the officer says, "You're being detained," then you know the stop is now being held open. If the officer asks to search, you say, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." If the officer orders you out, you say, "I will step out, but I do not consent to any searches." If the officer keeps pushing questions, you say, "I choose to remain silent." That is the full chain. Clear, calm, repeatable, no drama, no guessing, no helping. And here is why that chain works so well for you. Every sentence has one job. The first gets clarity, the second blocks consent, the third obeys without surrender, the fourth stops self-damage. That is it. You are not trying to beat the officer in an argument. You are trying to stop the stop from expanding through confusion. When you understand that, the whole roadside game looks different. You stop asking weak questions like, "Am I under arrest?" and start asking the question that actually matters in the moment. Next week, I'm revealing what to say when an officer claims they smell weed. Subscribe right now so you don't miss it, because that line gets drivers searched every single day. So let's lock this in for you. First, stop asking, "Am I under arrest?" unless that is truly the issue. Ask, "Officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave?" Second, if a search comes up, say, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." Third, if you were ordered out, comply, but repeat that you do not consent. Fourth, if the questions keep coming, use your silence instead of your panic. That is the power of this whole system. You stay calm, you stay clear, and you stop giving away rights by accident. Hit subscribe so you catch next week's video on the weed smell claim. Smash like if this script just gave you a roadside game plan you can actually remember. And drop a comment telling me which exact line you would use first. Stay safe out there.